Wow, what powerful expressions of worship today. Just to say we're going to see a victory and we can be honest and open before God. He knows all things that you're going through right now, and you can trust Him. And so I just speak that over you. Whatever you're facing, whatever life has got you going through right now, God is bigger. Christ has won. He is risen indeed. We celebrate that. But I speak over you that God knows you. He is for you. He's on your side, and you can trust Him. And so I invite you to do that today, even as we open up His Word and as we hear what God would say to us, teaching us about how to live a life that is wholehearted. That's the series that we're in right now. We're learning to be wholehearted. I'll remind you, some of you ask about resources. This whole series of teaching really comes out of a book that I read recently by a guy named Pete Scazzaro called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. That's a picture of it right there on the screen. There's this book. There's a day-by-day kind of devotional guide where twice a day you can spend time alone with the Lord, listening to the Lord. I encourage you to go on Amazon, get either or both of those things that'll help you. But we're learning to take this journey toward maturity in our spiritual life. Now, I'll recap a little bit in case you're just joining in with us. In week 1 of this teaching, we learned that we all have a problem. We may be physically mature, you may be intellectually mature, and in some ways married, relationally, growing in some ways. You may even have some spiritual development and growth and knowledge about your life, but a lot of us get stuck in our emotional development. And as such, we kind of still act out of our brokenness and immaturity. Our poster child for that was this guy named Saul in the Old Testament who externally, dude, he had it going on, right? He's taller than everybody else. He's the best looking man in the whole nation, and he's choice. He's strong. He's in the prime of his life. And even though he's spiritually anointed, there are broken places within him. He's dominated by holes, deficiencies in his heart, his insecurities, his anger, jealousy, and his desire to appear to have it all together, even though he didn't really have it on the inside. It was a problem for Saul. And so we learned that God doesn't want us to live wholehearted, right? He wants us to make this journey toward living with a whole heart. And then last week, we learned that to live wholehearted is to learn to live true to yourself that God has made you to be, trusting that God loves you deeply, that He's made you uniquely, and that He has called you purposefully, that God has a life that He wants you to live. And so as such, you don't have to live your life based on the expectations of other people. You don't even have to live a life that you're dreaming up and trying to conjure up for yourself. No, you can live confidently the life that God has called you and has equipped you to live. Now, the poster child for that was a guy named David, right, who faced a giant named Goliath. And in the process, he had to walk away from his critics and his doubters and his haters, and he just learned to be true to the way that God had wired him to be and how God had wired him to live. And in doing so, in being true to himself, God used him to bring an incredible victory. Now today, what you're going to learn is that to live this wholehearted life is also a journey. All right, you're not going to read the book and at the end of 8 chapters be done. You're not going to listen to this sermon series and boom, you're finished in 8 weeks. That's not the way it's going to work. What we're learning is this is a journey of your life. It's a process toward maturity. And that's what God has for you. God wants you on this journey sometimes. He requires you to go backwards before you can actually grow forward. All of us are called to achieve spiritual and emotional health. But you can't just go forward ignoring your past. How many of y'all have ever tried to sweep stuff under the rug? Y'all ever heard of that? You know, we just sweep stuff under the rug. But if you just keep sweeping stuff under the rug, it becomes this huge pile in your life, and you keep tripping over it. No, the goal is not to just ignore the wounds of your past and just pile up good things, even spiritual things, on top of that. No, you don't want to just go forward. You actually want to grow forward in your spiritual life, and that requires facing your past. Okay, so here's the principle that we're going to learn for the day. You must grow past your family rules and your childhood wounds. That's the principle. You need to grow past the rules of your family growing up and the wounds that maybe you incurred along the way. All of us are deeply impacted. You've been impacted by the family that you grew up in and by the things that have happened to you. Sometimes the Bible says to the 3rd and 4th generation, dysfunction can impact you. Bad things can happen. Can we talk about just family rules, those things that you grew up with, spoken or not, whether your family actually said this or this is just the way it was, these rules govern the way that you live. On the one hand, that may have blessed you a lot. Your parents may have taught you to honor God, tell the truth, be kind. That's awesome. Those are great rules to live by. But on the other hand, there are also these spoken or unspoken rules that could be a little bit of a weight for us. Rules that are not necessarily sinful, they're just the way you were raised. Think about it this way. How many of you were raised in a family where money was kind of the source of security? And the more money you had, the more secure you felt. Or if you really wanted to prove you had made it, then you got to have a lot of money. Nobody ever said that, but it's kind of the way we function. Or when it comes to conflict. You were taught, avoid conflict at all costs. Don't make anybody mad. Don't rock the boat, right? How many of you were raised in a family where one or the other parent that was their way of living life? And so you kind of picked that up. Or the exact opposite. Dude, you were raised in a family where y'all just threw stuff, cussed, and fussed all the time. That was just normal. What about in your family, was sadness a sign of weakness? Were you ever told, fellas, come on, anybody ever told, come on, big boys don't cry? You got to suck that up. And whether it was stated or implied, it was a rule that all of a sudden began to govern you. Expressing anger, it can be a no-no. I was in our small group recently, and we were having some one-on-one discussion with people in the group, and I was talking to one of my friends, and he said, when I was raised, you didn't express anger. It was bad, so you just eat it. But the problem is, eventually you're going to vomit what you've been eating, and the longer you stuff it right, it just comes out. Maybe that's the way you were raised. You don't express anger, or you explode with anger to make a point. Or maybe you were raised in a family where sarcasm or passive-aggressive behavior is just the way you did life. In my experience, can I be honest with you? I was blessed by mom and dad who loved Jesus. Man, they were so good to me. I'm blessed. Okay, if my life gets jacked up, it ain't my mom and daddy's fault, right? They've been good to me, and I'm so thankful for that. But honestly, my mom and dad were doing the best they could with what they had, and they were products of their own upbringing and raising too. And so my family had some rules, some that were not so helpful. One of our rules, I don't know that it was ever spoken, but we just didn't talk about our junk. I mean, we didn't talk about our problems. We didn't talk about drama. We didn't talk about dysfunction. We didn't talk about even pain. And I don't know, I know we had that stuff, but I just know we didn't talk about it, and we dang sure didn't talk about it in front of nobody else. You know what I'm saying? You don't air your dirty laundry. Come on, you got that rule, right? Some of y'all have that rule. You just don't air your dirty laundry. That was a rule I grew up with. Another rule that I grew up with, again, not right or wrong, it was just part of my family, I think for generations, is that my dad was gone a lot. Now, his dad was gone a lot too, worked heavy construction and pipelines and was gone, weeks at a time. And so my dad, when I was growing up as a little bitty kid, my dad was gone a lot out of necessity. He was still in college and then seminary, and so he would leave my house on Monday. He would go to seminary and come back on Friday. That's just the way that it worked. And then when he came home, he was pastoring and doing things, which meant that my mom largely was left to raise 4 small kids alone. Now, that, in my upbringing, that was not a problem at all, as far as I knew. And if it was, we wasn't going to talk about it, because that goes back to rule 1, right? You don't talk about your junk. But whenever I got married, I brought that rule into my marriage. And so I didn't think it was a problem. I mean, I was going to class, I was going to seminary, I was working, I was doing my thing. And I didn't think that was a problem for me to be gone. And even when we had kids, I still was living by that rule. It wasn't a sinful rule, but was it the way God designed family to work? I'll be honest with you, I created a lot of drama and turmoil and even wounds in my own marriage and family by just living according to this rule. Hey, it's okay for daddy to be gone hunting. I'll be back after a while. I'll be back this evening. I'll be back tomorrow. Didn't mean for it to be, but it was a very hurtful and dysfunctional thing for me. So that's what I'm saying to you is rules shaped your worldview just like they shaped mine. They just impacted the way that you do life. You became a Christian, right? And now all of a sudden you've got this brand new life. You're made spiritually alive, but check this. Many of us, you're sitting here right now, you're still functioning out of your old family rules, not your new family rules. Jesus has called you into a new family. You have a new way of doing life. Remember, one time when Jesus was teaching in a house and his mama and his brothers showed up, they thought he was crazy, losing his mind. And so they wanted to call him outside and talk to him. And in Mark chapter 3, Jesus said this. Mark chapter 3, answering them, he said, hey, who are my mother and my brothers? And looking about at those who were sitting around him, he said, behold, my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of God, he's my brother, sister, and my mother. What Jesus is saying is, we do have earthly family, but I'm calling you into spirit family. And what God wants to help you do in going backward so that you can grow forward is He wants to disciple you into your new spiritual family where there are new rules that supersede your old family rules. Does that make sense to you? That the way you were raised is not necessarily wrong or sinful, but is it God's way? God wants you to honor your parents. I think He wants you to honor your culture, your history, and all those things, but He wants you to obey Him. So all of us have to look back on our old way of doing life and our old family and ask, hey, is this the way that Jesus is calling me to live, or is it just the way that my family grew up doing things? There's also wounds of our own experience, right? Not only did you grow up in a family where there were rules stated or not, but you had experiences along the way, some good, some bad, that impacted you and shaped you. Some of those are very, very hurtful. Some of you may have experienced abuse or rape or shame, embarrassment. Maybe you were beat up in a fight or bullied at school, or you lacked money and felt inferior. Have you ever noticed that almost always the bad guy in the movies experienced one of those things? There's some childhood dysfunction. There's some pain in their life that they're now trying to pay back. In the midst of that trauma, it's very likely that you begin to believe lies, or maybe you made some vows. Oh, I'll never be like that. I'll never be like my mom. I'll never let that happen to me again. Maybe you accepted an identity. This is just the way I am now. Maybe you made agreements. Maybe you developed strategies for survival that shaped you. You're never going to let anybody else hurt you. There's no way you're going to be a failure. All those things, they're psychological phenomena. They're part of your wounded soul. But what I've learned over the last year or so is that childhood trauma also affects you physiologically in your brain, specifically your amygdala. I talked to a neurologist friend who explained to me that whenever you have negative events in your life, especially as a young person, something happens in your brain that short circuits actually the development of your brain, so that your brain actually gets stuck in this funky loop and you don't know how to process things from an emotionally healthy place. You're just jacked up. You can be 40 years old and something happens and you revert and act like you're 15 again or 5 again. You ever wonder why you cry all day long, or you went off on somebody and it really wasn't that big a deal, and yet your reaction to it was just like over the top? You ever wonder why? This is what he explained to me, and I hope this translates. We'll see. He said, we have these wounding events whenever we're kids, and then we have lots of other events in our life, some major, some really important, some wounding, some not. But he said, you'll be out here at 40 years old, and something will happen to you, and it'll ping you right here. But what happens is it begins to bounce off of these various things, and it goes right back down to this event right here. So that your response to what's happening when you're 40 is actually triggering something in your brain where you have a neural pathway. You start to act like you did when that wound happened. So that if you feel threatened or you feel like your security is being threatened, even out here, your reaction is years worth of pain and heartache. Whenever you feel like things are not right, or bad things are happening, or even good things, they can ping off of and hit you right down here. Here's the way that has looked at times in my own life. I want to be a little bit real honest with you. In the early years of my married life, I really struggled at times with objectifying my wife in our physical relationship. I know that there's this thing called treasuring her, and I know that there's supposed to be this heart connection that was supposed to be real. But that was proving very, very difficult for me. And I couldn't figure out what is wrong with me. Is it that I'm just a man? Maybe. Is it that I listened to too much Prince and Two Live Crew whenever I was a youth? Probably. That didn't help. But as I began to sit with God and say, God, would you show me, if I'm going to grow to be wholehearted like you want me to be, where is that? And you know what? God took me back to a time when I was 6 or 7 years old, when I experienced some things that really I didn't realize how they were impacting me. They were pinging off of me all the way down. These things up here when I'm an adult, all the way back down here where it's impacting me. You see, God wants to disciple you past your earthly family, and He also wants to heal wounds of your heart and your brain, and to expose lies you've believed, agreements you've made, strategies you've built, and old identities that you've taken on, and He wants to expose you to your new truth and your new reality and identity. I told you some weeks ago that I loved watching over the quarantine shutdown this TV series called The Chosen. One of the stories that I love is the first story that the movie opens with. It's the story of a girl you would know in the Bible named Mary Magdalene, right? But as the story opens up, Mary Magdalene, her story begins when she's a little girl, and she really is quoting a verse from Isaiah where she believed that God loved her, God made her, God formed her, that God was for her. But then something happened to her that was very wounding and traumatic, and she didn't believe that God was for her anymore. God had let her down. And so she believed a lie about God, and she changed her name, and demons began to possess her. Now, when Jesus comes in the show, when he heals her, he doesn't just deal with the demonic stuff. No, he actually calls her by her childhood name and quotes the childhood verse to remind her that he was healing her all the way down to the bone, all the way down to that place of hurt and wounding. And I want to say to you, that's what God is doing for you. That's what he wants to do for you. It's what he's doing in my own life. Just like God used Mary then as a powerful part of the gospel story, he wants to use you in that same way. Now let's look at a biblical example of that in the book of Genesis, a guy named Joseph. Joseph is a guy, he's a man who learned to grow forward. He's a man who learned to grow forward. He was impacted by the rules of his family, the ways and generations of the people that were before him. Joseph was the son of Jacob, the grandson of Isaac, the great-grandson of a guy named Abraham. But to the third and fourth generation, the dysfunction of his family impacted him. Think about it this way. Some of y'all know this story, maybe you don't, but I'll kind of remind you of some of the dysfunction that Joseph grew up under for 3 or 4 generations. When it came to lying in their family, that was sometimes very necessary. Remember, Abraham lied about his wife on 2 occasions, and then his son Isaac lied about his wife. And Isaac and Rebekah, their marriage was just marked by dishonesty and deception. And their son Jacob, well, they just named him liar. I mean, his name literally is deceiver. And then Jacob's sons, 12 of them, one of them's named Joseph. Look, they're so dishonest that they're going to lie to their father, ultimately, 10 of the boys are, about their brother's life and death. Favoritism in their family, quite all right. Abraham liked Ishmael. Isaac favored Esau. Jacob favored Joseph. Favoritism, that's just part of the way you raise your kids. Brothers being cut off from each other is a part of life. Abraham's sons, Isaac and Ishmael, they didn't get along very well, and they still don't. Right? Whenever Isaac had children, his sons Jacob and Esau, they had troubles, and Jacob fled for his life. The family is broken apart. Jacob's sons hate Joseph. They abuse him and eventually sell him as a slave. Now, the result on the one hand is Joseph is raised with a silver spoon in his mouth. He is daddy's favorite. He's a little bit of a tattletale, and he's very, very arrogant. Some of y'all may remember in the story of Joseph, he has this dream in Genesis 37. He has this dream that one day he's going to rule over all of his brothers, even his mom and his dad. But rather than hold on to that and kind of keep that on the DL, he opens up his big fat mouth and he tells everybody, hey, y'all are all going to serve me one day. How do you think that went over? How do you think it'd go over at your house, right? About like the way it did in Joseph's house. Not very well. So on the one hand, he's kind of this arrogant, he's kind of this spoiled brat kind of kid. But on the other hand, Joseph's life was very, very difficult. His brothers hated him. They abused him, ultimately sell him as a slave to a band of travelers. They went home and then lied to their dad about what happened. They even let their dad have a funeral for Joseph, knowing the whole thing's a lie. They don't know what's happened to him, but they just cover it up with lies. Joseph was barely 17 years old. Listen, lock in with me. He's barely 17 years old. And yet all of the rules of his family and the wounds of his family are already marking his life. It's difficult. It's not an easy journey. His brothers sell him as a slave. Joseph goes down to Egypt and he's bought. He lands in the house of a man named Potiphar. And the Bible tells us that though he's a slave there, Genesis 39 verse 2 says, the Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man. Potiphar puts everything that he owns under Joseph's care. And that seems good, but not all is good. Joseph is going to be falsely accused of rape by Potiphar's wife. And that lands him in prison. Genesis 39:21. But the Lord was with Joseph, and he extended him kindness and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. And that's awesome. But look, just because you're treated as the nicest person in jail, you're still in jail. That's still where he is, and unjustly so. So he sat there for years. And come on, I know you're sitting in your living room and you're on your couch right now, but could you enter in with me for a second? This guy for years is living as a slave to all the dysfunction and all the pain of his family's life. At one point, he interpreted a dream for two guys in jail, and one of them was cupbearer to the king. And whenever the dreams actually come true, the interpretations come through, Joseph pleaded with the cupbearer, hey, whatever you do, please don't forget me. I'm an innocent man. Yet Genesis 40, verse 23 says, yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but he forgot him. So for 2 more years, Joseph literally lives in a pit of despair. Then one night, if you know the story, Pharaoh has a dream. And it's unsettling to him. And he calls all his wise counselors and he says, somebody interpret this dream for me. And yet nobody can. And that's when the cupbearer remembers, hey, there's that guy in jail. So immediately Joseph is sent for, cleaned up, brought in front of Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says to him, hey, I hear you can interpret dreams. But that brash, spoiled, prideful kid, that's gone. Here's Joseph's response in Genesis 41:16. Joseph then answered Pharaoh and said, it's not in me. Life's not about me. But God will answer Pharaoh. He'll give you a favorable answer. And indeed, God did. Joseph told Pharaoh there would be 7 great years followed by 7 years of famine. He proposed the Pharaoh should prepare for those 7 bad years by storing up in the 7 great years. And then whenever the bad years came, he would just dole out the resources. And just like that, Pharaoh says, you're the man to be in charge of that project. And so Joseph became the vice president of all of Egypt. Now life's great. Joseph was given a wife, a preacher's daughter. Come on. A preacher's kid. He marries a preacher's daughter. They have 2 amazing kids. And when the years of famine come, the years are devastating. As a matter of fact, the famine is so widespread that it reaches all the way back to Canaan, to Jacob's house, to his dad, to his brothers that had mistreated him. And so Jacob says to his sons, I hear there's food in Egypt, go down there. And so they go down to Egypt to get food. And when they arrive, the Bible says Joseph recognized them. I bet he did. Come on, how many of y'all think he sat there and fantasized about this moment for how long? I mean, he's probably imagined this. At least that's the way we would do it in our flesh. And he recognizes them immediately, but they don't recognize him. It's been 15 years. A lot's changed. Joseph now looks like an Egyptian. He talks like an Egyptian. He walks like an Egyptian, right? They don't recognize him. And yet he's the man in power now, and they're bowing down in front of him. Can I ask you a question? What would you do? Have you fantasized for 15 years about those who've hurt you and wounded you? Have you grown forward, or have you just gone forward? And that wound is still real, it's still there, and you're still broken by that. Now be honest with you, Joseph does punk them a little bit. I think he's testing them some. He punks them a little bit, but something has happened over that 15-year period in his heart. Those old wounds and family ways, they do not rule him anymore. And in the story, eventually Joseph reveals his identity to his brothers. He told them to go get dad, go get the whole family, bring them down here. I'm going to provide for you. I'm going to protect you. And so Joseph becomes a blessing to his family and to his brothers. You see, he didn't just go forward, sweeping it under the rug and one day blow up on them when he had the chance. No, he's grown forward. He grew out of the pain of his past and the realities of his earthly upbringing, and he became a man who broke the family cycle, and he started a family blessing. And that's what I think God is saying to you right now. That God is inviting you, if you want to be spiritually and emotionally all that God has called you to be wholehearted, He's calling you to grow past your old wounds and your family ways to let God bring healing in you. Now, each week I'm giving you walkaways, and so these will be some walkaways that you can lock down on. But how did Joseph do it? How did he grow forward in his life? Well, here's how Joseph grew forward. Here's how you can grow forward too. If you're going to be wholehearted before God, healthy, spiritually and emotionally. Here's number 1. You've got to develop a sense of the bigness of God. I love that song we just got through singing. Oh, you're bigger than I thought. God, you're bigger than I thought you were. You can handle all things. You can handle my brokenness. You can handle all things. It's a declaration of your heart that you've got to make. God, I believe that you are bigger than all things. When Joseph revealed himself to his brothers, all these years later, he revealed to them that there had been a powerful shift that had taken place in his thinking. He's not stuck in his past and in his old pain. Here's what he says in Genesis 45, verse 7. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth and to keep you alive by great deliverance. Now, therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of his household and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Joseph had gone through a lot in his journey. And he's not making up this answer on the fly whenever he sees his brothers. What he's saying is, my life has been hard, but God has been good and God has been faithful. Now, what have you been focusing on? You've been focusing more on your pain, or have you been focusing more on the goodness and the faithfulness of God in the midst of the pain? For Joseph, there comes this moment somewhere in this 15-year journey where he says, God is bigger. He's bigger than the pain and he's bigger than the past, and he's actually Lord over both of those things. My brothers have abused me and sold me, and that's wrong and that's painful. But with a new perspective, Joseph could say, God was working in the middle of it. Now I've wondered, why did God make him go through all that? And you may wonder, God, why are you making me go through all this? And the truth is, I don't know. There's a part of God that's a mystery. He's bigger than we can imagine, right? The ways of God are bigger and different than what we would think. I don't know why Joseph had to go through all that. And why couldn't God have just sent him down to Egypt and let him be a ruler some other way? Could he have done that? Yeah, I think God could have done that. But somehow, through the crucible of life, through the realities of the pain that he went through, God was shaping Joseph's heart. He was shaping his character. He taught him brokenness and humility. He learned the power of trusting God, and God honors you whenever you trust him. Would you see God as bigger than everything in your life right now? The things that you can talk about, those pains in your life that you can't, that nobody knows about, would you just make a declaration right now in your soul and say, God, you are bigger than this. You're bigger than me. You're bigger than everything that I'm facing. God put you in the family that you were raised in. He didn't cause the pain or the problems that you've endured, but he is the Lord of it. And listen, I think what God's saying to you is he's working in the midst of it and in spite of all of it. He's bigger than the rules and the wounds. He's righteous and he's just. I've read that in the Psalms this week, that he is the king over all the earth, that he brings justice to every wrong in his time. But you can trust him. Oh, for grace to trust him more. Would you acknowledge, God, you're bigger than what I'm going through? Here's the second thing. Admit your own sadness, hurt, and loss. Admit that it hurts. Joseph doesn't just sweep his pain under the rug and go forward pretending like stuff never happened. No. That's part of the dysfunction of many of our families, is that we don't take time to unpack that and say, that was wounding to me. No, Joseph actually takes time to grieve pain and loss. Whenever he and his preacher's daughter wife have kids, Joseph names them names that indicate that he's in this healing process and journey. Genesis 41 verse 51 says, Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, this is what Manasseh means: God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. God is the one who's helping me move on. And he named the second one Ephraim, for he said, this is what Ephraim means: God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Yes, there's been pain, but God is bringing me into a place of fruitfulness. He's acknowledging that he's hurt. He's acknowledging the pain, but please hear me, he doesn't stay stuck there. And I'm saying to you, you can live your life looking at the rearview mirror, or you can say, God, I'm trusting you with that, and help heal me from that. And God, I want to begin to see it now from a different perspective. I'm honest about it, but heal me. I believe this is a journey for him. I don't believe he just woke up one day and he was all better. I think that this was a journey of years. Whenever in Genesis 45, the Bible says, whenever Joseph is revealing himself to his brothers, that whenever he finally reveals himself to them, he cries so loudly that everybody in the whole house can hear it. Now, look, this is not a tear formed in his eyes and, he's like, I'm trying to hold it together here. No, this is Michael Jordan after he won the championship the first time when his daddy wasn't there and he's laying on the floor in the locker room. Did y'all see that on The Last Dance? He's just heaving. That's what Joseph is doing. Why? Because all those things, though they've been healing, man, there's this pain that's being let out in this moment. He's not acting like you didn't hurt me, but he is saying, man, that was wounding to me. But part of healing is to let that out and to acknowledge it. Most people I know, including me, hey, we resist going back, don't we? It's not natural for me. I told you one of the rules of my family is we just don't talk about that stuff. And maybe you're sitting here and you're wondering, dude, man, I'm so tired of this. Can I just turn you off right now? Maybe you can. But part of you is resisting. You don't want to go down this rabbit hole. You don't want to chase all this stuff. What's the use of digging up old bones, right? What good can come from that? And I get it. I've offered all those excuses. But I'm saying to you, you can either go forward or you can grow forward. And the only way you're ever going to grow forward is to be man enough to be able to say, God, I need you to help me make some sense of things or to trust you with some things and let you heal me and disciple me toward your family, not my family. To trust you with the wounds in the past and the good and the bad, God, to trust you with all of it so that I can be strong the way you've called me to be strong. There is this sense in which you can either keep on dealing with the bad fruit, keep blowing up, keep living by those old rules, or you can say, God, I need you to help me remove these roots and God heal these things and bring me to freedom. That happens whenever you admit, man, there are pains and problems and troubles in my life that are very real. Here's the third thing. You need to let faith reframe your faith story. Let faith reframe your life story. Joseph chose by faith to stop seeing himself as a victim. He's not a victim. These things didn't happen to me. He sees himself as a vessel in the hand of God, that God was using those things that happened to him to bring him to a place where he's a part of God's story. And so he reframes his whole life, not selfishly, but from the perspective of faith, that God's bigger and God's at work, even in times when I don't feel it or see it. There is this sense in where God was directing him at every step. And I think it's awesome that God is affirming to him. Remember in Genesis 37, I told you when he was a little kid, he had this dream that all of his family's going to bow down and worship him, or bow down at his feet. He's going to be the Lord over them. And he couldn't keep it to himself, and he blurted it out, and they hated him for it. But it came true. And Joseph is able to see his life through the lens and perspective of the faithfulness of God. Listen, that what God started when he was a little boy was never in doubt or question through every pain, every trial, every trouble, every heartache, through imprisonment, through false accusation, through abuse. God was still faithful, writing this story, not wasting a hurt. And can I say to you, God put you on this planet, created you to be deeply loved, uniquely made, called with a purpose. And I don't care what's happened to you, the environment you were raised in, God is writing your story. Begin to see your life through that lens of faith, not through the lens of your past pain. You let faith begin to be the thing that helps you to see your life journey and your life story. That's how you're going to be free. Now, I love Ephesians 2:10. We quote this verse often, but I'll remind you of it. It's one of my favorite. Ephesians 2:10 says, "For we are his workmanship, God's handiwork." You're his poem, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand, before all of creation. God prepared some things so that you could walk in those things. And I'm declaring over you right now that there's not a pain or a problem or a heartache that you've ever gone through that's going to stop that. That God's at work. And you need to let faith begin to reframe your life story. He's using everything about your life, your family, your past experiences, good and bad, to shape you and prepare you for the purpose he has for you. Here's the last thing. You need to partner with God to be a blessing. You go back to the pain of the past, but you realize I'm not going to live there. I'm not going to live in that place. Man, I'm partnering with God because God's got a good plan, and my life's actually going to be a part of blessing. That's the principle. That's the way Joseph saw himself and moved forward. Whenever Joseph's dad, Jacob, all of his family came down there, he cares for him. Eventually, Jacob dies. And so now it's just Joseph and his brothers. And his brothers, once the dad dies, they're scared. Genesis 50 verse 15 says, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph bears a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrongs which we did to him? Now, why do you think they're worried that once daddy passes on, Joseph's going to have borne this grudge and he's about to open up a can on them? Why? Why are they worried about that? Because that's human nature. And that's what happens when you go forward instead of grow forward. You just hold it and you stuff it until it's the time. And so they're worried about that. They know they've done Joseph wrong, and look, they've made some progress in even their own journey in trusting God as well, but they're worried that maybe Joseph's been faking, hiding, stuffing, so they revert back to their old ways. They go to Joseph and they say, hey, bro, I know Daddy didn't tell you, but he told us right before he died. Daddy told us to tell you, please forgive us. Now, that's 100% lie. Jacob never said that. But in that moment, they revert back to those old ways. In their family, that was one of the rules. You know, lies are an abomination before the Lord and a very present help in time of need, right? I mean, we'll quote the Bible that way. That's combining two wrong verses. But that was their way of doing it. When you get in a squeeze, you just lie to get out of it. And so they said to Joseph, Joseph, Daddy told us to tell you, please forgive us. And the Bible says in verse 17 of chapter 50, it says, and Joseph wept whenever they spoke to him. Vice president of Egypt, most powerful man, second most powerful man in the land, he's weeping when they say that to him. And I think there are two things about that. One, I think it's beautiful that a strong man can actually cry. David, a giant killer, knew he could cry. Jesus wept. You're not stronger than him. Here's Joseph, strong dude, ruler, smart, entrepreneur. And yet he has the freedom to be in touch with his emotions and say, you know what, that's a tough one for me. And I think it was a tough one for him because, listen, Joseph had grown forward, but his brothers in some ways were still stuck. They're going back to the old family ways. And Joseph in this moment, I think, may be a little bit hurt by that. But can I just say to you, other people in your family may not grow forward with you, but you can. You can. You keep growing forward. And maybe he's weeping because he knows there's still work to do before my family is wholehearted like it needs to be. Genesis 50 verse 19, Joseph says to them, don't be afraid, for am I in God's place? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. So therefore, don't be afraid. I'm going to provide for you and your little ones. So he comforted them and he spoke kindly to them. You see, even after their dad was dead and gone, the healing in Joseph's heart had been true and real. He hadn't wasted 15 years just going forward. No, over those 15 years, sitting with God, trusting in God, walking with God, he had grown forward to a point in his life where he could say, what you meant for evil, God's intended for good. And that past stuff that we all walked through, it was very, very real. And it was very, very painful, but it's very much over. And I'm a different person. And now I'm a part of God's plan to bring blessing even out of my pain. He had found God to be faithful with him and the healer. And so he becomes this blessing, this source of protection and provision and comfort, not just to his generation, but to many generations past that. And for my part, I can tell you, I'm glad that he did. If Joseph had just gone forward and not grown forward, if Joseph had still borne a grudge, if Joseph had just waited on the right time and finally daddy's gone and yeah, y'all about to get yours now. If he had just wiped out his brothers, guess what? Here's the deal. He would have wiped out Simeon and Levi and Asher, Naphtali, Judah. And if he wipes out Judah, there is no Jesus. And you see, it's because Joseph chose to grow forward that 1,000 generations later, we're still saying that's the man. But because he chose to have grace for his brother Judah, down Judah's family tree came one named Jesus, who's going to bless you forever. But that happened because one man chose to grow past his pain and not just go past his pain and let God make him wholehearted. You know what? You're facing a choice right now. You can live under the old ways and your family rules and your past pain. You can keep sweeping things under the rug and just going forward. And you know what? You're going to repeat the dysfunction of your family to the third and fourth generation. But can I speak a word over you from the Bible? Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 9 says this, "But know therefore that the Lord your God, He is God, and He's faithful." Can I speak that over you? Would you know that He's God? He is God. He's faithful. And He keeps His covenant, and He keeps His loving kindness with you right now to 1,000th generation with those who love Him and keep His commandments. That God is giving you the opportunity right now to say, you know what, I don't want to curse my family to 3 and 4 generations. No, I'm going to choose to bless my family to 1,000 generations because I'm choosing to trust the loving, faithful God, to trust Him, to love Him, to invite Him into the pain of my past, to bring me healing and make me wholehearted. Now, I know that you may think that's impossible, but listen, with God, nothing is impossible. And He wants to bring that healing to you. It's part of your journey today. Hey, that's our time. I'm gonna lead you to pray in just a moment, and then we're going to sing a song. It's one of our favorite songs right now, right? It's called Waymaker. And you may not see how God's going to heal you. You don't see how God's going to redeem the dysfunction of your past and your family. But this song can become your declaration. So I don't want you to jump. I want you to stay with us, and I want this song to become your declaration, your expression of faith today, that God is the one who's going to make a way for your healing. Come on, would you pray with me right now? Let me lead you to pray. And could you just say, God, I declare you're bigger. You're bigger than I thought. You're bigger than my pain and my past. And God, you're better than I can imagine. And God, I'm having to trust that by faith now. I see it in this story in Joseph. But God, I need you to be strong for me. I declare it. Would you just own some of your hurt and your pain with the Lord and some of the stuff you don't even know what it is maybe, but would you just invite God to reveal to you those rules of your old family that need to be laid down so that you could be discipled into your new spiritual family? And if you've never received Christ, would you just do that now? Would you say, Jesus, I need you to forgive me and change me and make me spiritually alive? Come on, would you begin to see your life now through the lens of faith? That maybe what the enemy and what others meant for evil, God meant for good. Would you ask God to give you grace to trust Him more? Would you say, Lord, I ask you to use my life now to be a blessing to 1,000 generations. God, that I lay down animosity and pain and a victim mindset. And God, I say, give me a whole heart. God, that's impossible with me, but you are the waymaker. And I declare that even now. In Christ's name, amen.